Richard "Rich" Thompson sat behind his polished mahogany desk in his opulent office, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing the sprawling metropolis that lay beneath him like a glimmering jewel. The skyline was a testament to wealth and ambition, and Rich reveled in it. Today was one of those days where everything felt right. He was on the verge of sealing a multi-million-dollar deal that would elevate his company's status even further in the competitive world of finance. The air was sharp with the scent of expensive cologne, mingling with the faint aroma of rich leather from the designer chairs surrounding his desk. Rich wore a tailored suit that hugged his athletic frame, the fabric a deep navy that contrasted sharply against the gleaming silver of his watch. A gift from himself, naturally. He looked every bit the part of the successful businessman, exuding confidence as he finalized the last details of the transaction over the phone. "Just make sure the numbers are accurate this time, Tom," he instructed, his voice a blend of authority and impatience. "I won't tolerate any mistakes on this deal. We're not just making money, we're making history." He hung up, a smug smile forming on his lips as he swiveled in his chair to gaze out at the city below. His empire was vast, built on late nights and relentless ambition, but the world outside his window felt distant, filled with people whose struggles and hardships were utterly foreign to him. "Hey, Rich, you got a minute?" came a voice from the doorway. It was Lisa, his assistant, a sharp and efficient woman who had become accustomed to his brusque demeanor. She stepped into the room, holding a stack of papers. "I don't have time for distractions, Lisa," he replied, barely turning to face her. "I'm about to close the biggest deal of my career." "Right, but this is important," she pressed, her tone insistent. "It's about the charity gala next month. We need your RSVP." Rich scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Charity? You know I don't have time for that nonsense. Those people are responsible for their own messes. Why should I waste my resources on them?" Lisa raised an eyebrow, visibly taken aback by his callousness. "Rich, it's not just about you. There are people who genuinely need help. You could make a difference." He waved a dismissive hand. "Difference? Please. It's a waste of time and money. Besides, I've got other priorities right now. Let's focus on what really matters." With that, he turned back to the view, signaling that the conversation was over. Lisa sighed, knowing better than to push him further. As she exited, Rich couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her words lingered in the air long after she left. He shrugged it off, returning to the numbers on his screen, where profit margins danced enticingly before him. Later that day, as he stepped outside his towering office building, the cacophony of the city enveloped him. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over the asphalt streets and the bustling sidewalks. Rich was about to step into his luxury car, a sleek black sedan that gleamed with polished perfection, when he noticed a figure out of the corner of his eye. "Spare change, sir?" The voice was raspy, worn down by time and hardship. Rich turned to see a disheveled man, his clothes tattered and dirty, holding out a trembling hand. The man's face was lined with the struggles of life on the streets, eyes reflecting a weariness that Rich could hardly comprehend. Rich felt a surge of irritation. "Get a job," he snapped, his tone cold and dismissive. "You think I have money to throw away on you?" The man, Samuel "Sam" Jenkins, flinched at the harshness of Rich's words, but held his ground. "I'm not asking for much, just enough to get something to eat," he replied, his voice steady despite the rejection. Rich huffed, shifting his weight as he prepared to walk away. "You're just going to spend it on booze or drugs anyway. Figure it out." With that, he climbed into his car, slamming the door shut as if to close off the encounter entirely. As the engine roared to life, he glanced in the rearview mirror at Sam, who had turned away, shoulders slumped in defeat. A fleeting sense of guilt flickered in Rich's mind, but he quickly buried it under layers of self-righteousness. He had worked hard for his wealth. He had earned every penny. Why should he feel responsible for those who had failed to do the same? That night, Rich found himself back in his office, poring over spreadsheets long after most employees had gone home. The glow of his computer screen illuminated the lavish decor around him, but he felt a strange emptiness that he couldn't quite place. As he leaned back in his chair, he overheard a conversation from the hallway. Two employees, Jake and Sarah, were discussing the upcoming charity gala. "I just think it's a great opportunity to give back to the community," Sarah said enthusiastically. "You know, we're really lucky to have what we have. It's important to help others." Jake chuckled. "Yeah, but let's be real. Most of those people are just going to squander any help we give them. They're in that situation for a reason. It's not our fault." Rich's jaw tightened as he listened, irritation bubbling to the surface. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "What a waste of time," he muttered under his breath as he stood up, preparing to leave. As he walked past the two employees, he couldn't help but interject. "You really think throwing money at those people is going to solve anything? They need to take responsibility for their own lives. We're not here to be their saviors." Jake nodded in agreement, while Sarah looked taken aback. "I just think we have a responsibility," she said quietly, but Rich was already dismissing her words, shaking his head. "Responsibility? This is a business, not a charity. We need to focus on profits, not on enabling those who can't help themselves." With that, he walked out of the office, the echo of his footsteps fading behind him as he made his way to the elevator. He stepped inside, the doors sliding shut with a soft hiss, leaving behind the chatter and laughter of his employees. As the elevator descended, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something profound, something that perhaps went beyond the numbers in front of him. But those thoughts were quickly drowned out by the allure of his wealth and the life he had built. As the doors opened to the lobby, Rich squashed the flicker of doubt that dared to surface. He was Richard Thompson, a man of success. And in his world, compassion was just a distraction. Rich Thompson's luxury sedan purred down the wide streets of the bustling city, the sirens of the world outside muffled by the plush interior and the soft hum of the engine. He had just closed a significant deal, and the thrill of success coursed through his veins. As he flipped through the messages on his phone, his thoughts were on the next big investment. Suddenly, the car jolted as the engine sputtered and died, leaving him stranded on a deserted street. "Great," he muttered under his breath, tapping the steering wheel in frustration. The street was eerily quiet, the neon lights of nearby buildings flickering in the distance. Rich sighed, knowing that the nearest diner was a few blocks away. He stepped out of the car, the chill of the evening air hitting him abruptly. Adjusting his designer jacket, he began the short trek to the diner, his thoughts still tangled in business. As he walked, he passed by a small park, where shadows flickered under the dim streetlights. There, sitting on a worn wooden bench, was Samuel Sam Jenkins, the homeless man he had encountered before. This time, Sam was not alone. He was sharing a half-eaten sandwich with another homeless individual, a woman who looked to be in her 50s, her face lined with hardship. Rich's first instinct was to turn away, to ignore their presence as he had before. But something compelled him to pause. "Hey, Sam," Rich said, his tone more curt than he intended. "Rich," Sam replied, his voice warm, as if they were old friends. He gestured toward the woman beside him. "This is Jane. She hasn't eaten all day. We were just sharing what little we have." Rich's gaze shifted to Jane, who offered a weak smile. The sight of the two sharing a meal struck a chord in him. He felt a pang of something, guilt, compassion. He quickly shook it off, blaming it on his hunger. "I need to get to the diner," he said, the urgency of his own needs overriding any sense of connection. "Why don't you join us?" Sam suggested, his eyes twinkling with an inviting warmth that Rich found disarming. "There's always room for one more at our table." Rich hesitated, the world he inhabited making it hard to accept such an invitation. But the diner felt miles away, and the cold breeze was biting. He knew he could afford to buy his own meal, yet something, a flicker of curiosity, made him nod. "All right, just for a minute." As he sat down on the bench, he felt the weight of his tailored suit against the rough wood, a stark contrast to the lives he was momentarily sharing. Sam offered him a piece of the sandwich. Here, it's not much, but it's better than nothing. Rich waved it away. No thanks, I just ate. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Suit yourself, Sam chuckled, taking a bite. But you'd be surprised how much better food tastes when you share it. It's not just about the meal, it's about the company. Rich found himself intrigued by Sam's perspective. You really believe that? He asked, leaning back slightly, his defenses still intact but curiosity beginning to chip away at them. Absolutely, Sam replied, his voice steady and sincere. Out here, we're all we've got. The world can be a lonely place, you know. But when we come together, we create something beautiful, even if it's just for a moment. Rich frowned, his mind racing. He had spent years building walls around himself, securing his empire at the expense of others. Isn't it just survival for you? I mean, what's beautiful about that? Sam's expression shifted, the light in his eyes dimming momentarily. Survival is part of it, sure. But it's how we survive that matters. I've seen people with nothing share everything they have, and I've seen people with everything turn their backs on those who are struggling. It's all about choices, Rich. And you know what? Even in the darkest times, kindness shines the brightest. Rich shifted uncomfortably, the weight of Sam's words settling in his chest. He had never considered his own choices in such stark terms. I don't know, Sam. It's hard to see kindness when you're focused on getting ahead. Maybe that's the problem, Sam replied, his tone gentle but firm. You're so busy chasing after more that you're missing what's right in front of you. Life isn't just about what you can accumulate. It's about who you become along the way. Rich opened his mouth to argue, but found himself at a loss. The truth of Sam's words resonated deeper than he expected. He could feel a crack forming in the armor he wore so proudly. So, you think this sharing, caring, makes life better? He asked, trying to understand. Yes, Sam said, nodding emphatically. It's the connections we make that give life meaning. Not the money or the cars or the big houses. Those are just things. But a friend, a community, those are what keep us going when things get tough. Rich stared at Sam, the man's passion and conviction lighting up his weathered face. He felt an urge to defend his life's choices but couldn't muster the words. Instead, he found himself asking, "What about you? Aren't you tired of this life? Why not just give up?" Sam chuckled softly, a sound that echoed with both sadness and strength. I've had my share of dark days, Rich, but giving up isn't an option. It's about finding hope where it seems impossible. When I share a meal with Jane, or when we laugh about something silly, I'm reminded that there's still beauty in this world, and that's worth fighting for. Rich looked away, his gaze drawn to the distant lights of the diner. The aroma of fried food wafted through the air, mingling with the cool breeze. He realized he was hungry, not just for food, but for understanding, for connection. Yet the thought of immersing himself in that world felt foreign, daunting even. I should probably get going, he said, wanting to retreat back to the safety of his life, where everything was predictable and controlled. Take care, Rich, Sam replied, his voice steady. Remember, it's never too late to change how you see the world. You just have to be open to it. With those words echoing in his mind, Rich stood up, feeling the weight of the conversation lingering in the air. He nodded to Sam and Jane, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between them. As he walked away, he felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, resentment, and a hint of curiosity. The diner was just ahead, but his mind was far away, grappling with the reality of the lives he had ignored for so long. Inside the diner, the noise of clattering plates and lively chatter enveloped him as he took a seat at the counter. But even as he ordered his meal, his thoughts drifted back to Sam, to the idea of community and compassion. The food arrived, but it felt tasteless, overshadowed by the weight of the encounter he had just experienced. He couldn't shake the feeling that perhaps there was more to life than what he had been chasing. Yet, as quickly as the thought surfaced, he pushed it aside, retreating into the familiar comfort of his materialistic mindset. After all, who had time for kindness when success was just within reach? The atmosphere at the charity gala was a kaleidoscope of opulence, swirling gowns and tailored suits, all dancing under the soft glow of chandeliers that resembled clusters of diamonds. Richard "Rich" Thompson found himself standing at the edge of the grand ballroom, a glass of expensive champagne in hand. The air was thick with laughter and self-congratulatory chatter, a cacophony of the wealthy discussing their latest philanthropic exploits as if they were merely the latest fashion trends. "Did you hear about the new school they're building downtown?" one woman exclaimed, her voice laced with a practiced enthusiasm. "It's going to be a state-of-the-art facility, a true testament to our commitment to the community." Rich raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of his drink. "Or a tax write-off," he muttered under his breath, feeling increasingly out of place amidst this display of wealth, masquerading as generosity. He adjusted his cufflinks, hoping to blend in, yet the disconnect gnawed at him. He was here to network, to make connections that could lead to more deals, but something felt hollow about the entire affair. As he scanned the room, he caught sight of familiar faces, his fellow businessmen and women who wore their philanthropy like a medal, a badge of honor that signified their financial prowess rather than any genuine desire to effect change. He sighed, already weary of the pretense. Just then, he overheard a conversation between two men, both sporting custom-tailored suits. "Last year, I donated a cool $1 million to the homeless shelter," one boasted, puffing out his chest. "Had a lovely dinner with the board members afterward, and we all agreed it was a brilliant move for my portfolio." Rich clenched his jaw at the superficiality of their discussion. The idea of charity as a mere transaction, a means to an end, felt wrong to him. He remembered Sam Jenkins, the homeless man he had encountered a few times, whose genuine kindness had left a mark on his heart. He couldn't help but wonder what Sam would think of this gala, of the people parading their philanthropy like peacocks. Lost in thought, Rich almost didn't notice when a gentle hand touched his shoulder. He turned to find a smiling woman, her name tag reading Laura, a high-profile philanthropist known for her charitable endeavors. "Rich, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice warm but her eyes searching. "What are your thoughts on the event?" Rich forced a smile, feeling the pressure to conform to the expected response. "It's quite the gathering. Impressive, really." Laura tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You don't sound convinced. You know, not all of us are here just for the status. Many of us genuinely want to make a difference." "Right," he replied, his skepticism creeping back in. "But how many of us are really ready to roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty?" "Maybe you should join us at the shelter sometime," she suggested, her tone playful yet earnest. "We could use more people like you who are willing to engage beyond just writing a check." Rich chuckled lightly, a dismissive sound. "I'll stick to my business dealings, thanks." He felt a familiar wall go up, the protective barrier he'd crafted over the years to ward off any genuine connection. As the evening wore on, Rich found himself drifting from one group to another, nodding, smiling, but feeling increasingly detached from the conversation. Just when he thought he might make a hasty exit, something caught his eye. Sam Jenkins, standing in the corner of the room, clad in a simple but clean outfit, an apron tied around his waist. Rich's heart raced. What was Sam doing here? The last place he expected to see the man who had shown him the meaning of community was at a lavish gala filled with the elite. The contrast was stark. Sam looked out of place, yet there was a serene confidence about him as he served food to a group of guests who had chosen to mingle with the less fortunate. "Here you go, sir," Sam said, his voice steady and warm as he handed a plate to a young man who looked overwhelmed by the atmosphere. "Enjoy and don't forget to savor every bite." Rich felt a tug at his conscience as he watched Sam move gracefully among the guests, offering more than just food. He offered a sense of humanity, a connection that seemed to transcend the superficiality surrounding them. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, Rich felt a jolt of recognition, a reminder of the lessons he had learned from Sam. Not just about kindness, but about the importance of being present in the lives of others. "Sam!" Rich called out, unable to suppress the urge to approach him. The warmth in Sam's eyes was matched only by the faintest hint of surprise. "Rich!" Sam replied, a smile breaking across his face. "Did you come to support the cause?" Rich hesitated, the truth caught in his throat. I'm still figuring that out," he admitted, the vulnerability of the moment catching him off guard. Sam nodded, as if he understood the unspoken complexities of Rich's life. "It's a good cause. We're all trying to do our part, one way or another. Even in this fancy gathering, there are people who genuinely care." Rich swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his previous dismissals. "You make it look easy, Sam. I've been struggling to understand all of this." "Just start with one small step," Sam encouraged, his tone firm yet gentle. "It's less about the money and more about the intent behind it. If you want to make a difference, it has to come from the heart." Rich considered Sam's words. Could he really shift his mindset? Was it possible to break free from the chains of wealth and status that had bound him for so long? As the night wore on, Rich felt a flicker of determination ignite within him. He decided he would donate a significant sum to the charity that evening. Though the thought had initially been a fleeting idea, it began to take root, growing stronger with every interaction he had witnessed. Returning to the main hall, he approached the donation table, his heart racing at the thought of making a commitment. "I'd like to make a donation," he said, his voice steady, surprising even himself. The attendant smiled brightly, eager to assist him. "That's wonderful. How much would you like to contribute?" Rich hesitated for a moment, the figure swirling in his mind. "How about $100,000? The attendant's eyes widened in disbelief, and she quickly scribbled down his information. "Thank you so much. This will go a long way in helping those in need." As Rich turned away, he felt a mix of exhilaration and doubt. Was he truly making a difference, or was he merely trying to buy his way into a sense of respectability? Just then, he felt a familiar presence beside him. "Rich, I heard what you just did," Laura exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with approval. "That's a fantastic contribution." "Thanks, but I'm not sure if it's enough," he replied, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. Laura shook her head, her expression sincere. "It's not about the amount. It's about the intention behind it. You're taking a step in the right direction, and that's what matters." Before Rich could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air, dripping with sarcasm. "What's this? Mr. Thompson trying to be a philanthropist now?" It was Mark, a longtime friend and business rival, stepping into the conversation with an eyebrow raised. "You're not trying to buy your way into the good graces of the community, are you?" Rich felt a heat rise to his cheeks, the tension in the air palpable. "No, Mark, it's not like that," he said, trying to keep his tone steady, though the scrutiny made him uneasy. "Come on, it's all a facade, isn't it? You think throwing money at the problem will make you a saint?" Mark chuckled, crossing his arms. "Maybe it's more than that, Mark," Rich shot back, surprising himself with the defensiveness in his voice. "Maybe it's about doing something real for a change, not just talking about it." Mark smirked, clearly not convinced. "We'll see how long this lasts. Don't forget, Rich, the world is full of people who will take your donations and still leave you feeling empty inside." Rich stood there, grappling with Mark's words. Doubt crept back in, but a part of him felt a sense of clarity. He was ready to challenge the status quo, to prove that there was more to life than just wealth and status. As he turned to look for Sam once more, he felt a sense of resolve wash over him. This was just the beginning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the shelter buzzed with a mix of laughter and murmurs. Rich Thompson stood at the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. This was his first day volunteering at the very place where he had seen Sam Jenkins, the homeless man who had shaken his previously unyielding worldview. The scent of coffee and freshly baked bread wafted through the air, a stark contrast to the sterile corporate scents he was accustomed to in his office. "Hey, you must be rich!" A cheerful voice broke through his thoughts. It was Clara, the shelter coordinator, a woman in her early 40s with a warm smile and a welcoming demeanor. "We're so glad to have you here." "Thanks," Rich replied, his voice hesitant. He felt out of place in the casual environment, surrounded by volunteers who seemed to have a natural ease about them. "I'm just here to help." Clara nodded, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "That's what we're all here for. Let me show you around." As she led him through the bustling shelter, Rich observed the interactions around him. People were laughing, sharing stories, and forming connections. It was a world vastly different from the one he inhabited. Finally, Clara stopped in front of a small kitchen area. "This is where we prepare meals. You can help chop vegetables or serve food. Whatever you're comfortable with." Rich nodded, feeling a sense of trepidation. But just then, he spotted Sam across the room, engaged in a conversation with a group of men. Sam's presence brought an unexpected sense of comfort. Rich approached him, determination in his steps. "Hey, Sam!" Rich called out, and Sam turned, a wide smile breaking across his weathered face. "Rich, you made it!" Sam exclaimed, his voice rich with warmth. "I'm glad to see you here." Rich smiled back, feeling an odd sense of camaraderie. "I thought I'd come see what this place is all about." Sam gestured towards the kitchen. "You're in for a treat. The food we serve is better than what you get in some high-end restaurants." He chuckled, and Rich couldn't help but laugh along, the sound feeling foreign, yet freeing. As they moved to the kitchen together, Sam began to share snippets of his life. "You know, I used to dream of becoming a chef. I love cooking. My mom taught me everything I know. But life?" He trailed off, his expression turning serious. "What happened?" Rich asked, genuinely intrigued. His previous life of luxury felt so distant now, as if he were peering into a different reality. "Life has a funny way of knocking you down. I lost my job during the recession. Then my family fell apart. Before I knew it, I was on the streets," Sam replied, his voice tinged with sadness. "But I learned a lot during those years. About people, about kindness. You can't really put a price on that." Rich listened intently. Here was a man who had faced unimaginable challenges, yet had retained a sense of humanity that Rich had long since lost in his pursuit of wealth. "What do you think is the biggest lesson you've learned?" Rich asked, his curiosity piqued. "Empathy," Sam said without hesitation. "It's easy to judge someone when you've never walked in their shoes. Everyone has a story. Everyone is fighting their own battles. If we can just take a moment to listen, we can make a difference." Rich nodded, absorbing Sam's words like a sponge. He felt a shift within himself, a burgeoning understanding of the world that extended beyond his own experiences. As they chopped vegetables together, Rich found himself sharing pieces of his life too, recounting his work, his achievements, and the hollow feeling that often accompanied them. "Sounds lonely," Sam commented, pausing to look at Rich. "All that success, but no one to share it with? That's a heavy burden to carry." Rich stared at the pile of chopped vegetables before him, contemplating Sam's words. "Sometimes, I think I've become so focused on success that I've forgotten how to connect with people. I don't know how to change that." "Start here," Sam replied, a spark in his eyes. "You're already doing it. Just being here, listening, and helping. It's a step in the right direction." The evening wore on, filled with laughter and shared meals, and Rich found himself increasingly at ease in the shelter's warm environment. He served food alongside Sam, watching as the patrons approached the counter with smiles and gratitude. The experience was nothing like he had imagined. It was fulfilling in a way that his previous endeavors had never been. As the night drew to a close, Clara gathered everyone for a brief meeting. "I just want to thank you all for your hard work tonight. Every meal we serve brings us one step closer to building a stronger community," she said, her voice ringing with sincerity. "And remember, it's not just about the food. It's about the connections we make and the support we provide for one another. Rich felt a swell of emotion at her words. He was beginning to understand the profound impact of community, something he had overlooked for so long in his pursuit of wealth. After the meeting, he found Sam sitting quietly in a corner, staring out of the window. "Hey," Rich said softly, approaching him. "You okay?" Sam sighed, a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Yeah, just thinking. You know, not everyone gets a second chance. I want to make the most of this opportunity." "What do you mean?" Rich asked, intrigued. Sam turned to Rich, his eyes earnest. "I need to find a job, something stable, but my past, it keeps haunting me." There was a vulnerability in Sam's voice that tugged at Rich's heart. "Have you thought about getting a job at the shelter?" Rich suggested, the idea forming in his mind. "I could speak to Clara. I'm sure she'd be willing to help." Sam looked at Rich, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "You think so? But what if they see my record? It's a dead end." "Let me handle it," Rich said, a newfound determination in his voice. "You deserve a chance. We all do." As they talked, Rich felt a bond forming, a connection that transcended their differing backgrounds. It was as if the walls Rich had built around himself were beginning to crumble, replaced by a sense of purpose and understanding. Later that night, as Rich drove home, the city lights twinkling like stars in the dark, he reflected on the day's events. He felt lighter, as though he had shed a layer of his former self. The world outside his luxury car seemed more vivid, more alive. He realized that the true richness in life lay not in material wealth, but in the connections we forge and the compassion we show. The following days saw Rich returning to the shelter with newfound enthusiasm. He worked alongside Sam, their bond deepening with each shared laugh and each story exchanged. Rich began to see the impact of poverty up close, the struggles faced by the shelter's patrons, the resilience they exhibited, and the importance of every small act of kindness. One afternoon, as they prepared for dinner service, Rich broached the subject he had been mulling over for days. "Sam, I spoke to Clara about getting you a job here. She's open to it, but we need to address your record first." Sam's expression turned serious. "I appreciate that, Rich, but it's not just about getting a job. It's about proving I'm more than my past." "You are more," Rich insisted, his voice firm. "Let's figure this out together. I'll help however I can." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of Sam's past hanging heavy in the air. Then Sam nodded, determination shining in his eyes. "All right, let's do it." Rich felt a rush of excitement mixed with trepidation. They were embarking on a journey together, one that would challenge both of them in ways they hadn't anticipated. As they continued their work at the shelter, Rich knew that he was no longer just a wealthy businessman. He was becoming part of something bigger, something meaningful, and for the first time in a long while, he felt alive. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the alleyways of the city. As Rich Thompson sat in his plush office chair, the remnants of his multi-million-dollar deal still echoing in his mind. But today, he felt a tug of restlessness that he couldn't quite shake. He had spent the last few weeks volunteering at the shelter, a decision that had initially seemed like a mere public relations stunt to polish his image. Yet something deeper had begun to take root within him, something he could not easily dismiss. Determined to help Sam Jenkins, Rich had leveraged his connections to clear the homeless man's criminal record. It had been a complicated process, tangled in bureaucracy and skepticism, but he had navigated through it with the same determination he had once applied to closing business deals. "It's just a matter of making the right calls," he had told himself, a mix of determination and guilt swirling in his chest. He desperately wanted Sam to have a fresh start, a chance to reclaim his life. On a chilly Tuesday morning, Rich found himself pacing in his office, a cup of coffee in hand. He had been waiting for Sam to arrive at the shelter, where they were supposed to discuss job opportunities. It was unusual for Sam to be late, and with each passing minute, Rich felt a creeping sense of unease. He wouldn't just bail on me, would he muttered, shaking his head as if to dispel the thought. Just as he was about to pick up the phone, the shelter's director, a kind-hearted woman named Clara, burst into his office. "Rich, have you seen Sam?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "He didn't show up today, and he didn't call. That's not like him." Rich's heart sank. "No, I haven't seen him. I thought he'd be here. I was hoping to discuss some job leads." Clara sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm worried. He's been making such progress, and I'd hate to think he's slipped back into bad habits." Without a second thought, Rich grabbed his coat. "I'll go look for him," he declared, determination flooding his voice. "I'll check the diner where we first met. He often goes there." Clara nodded, her eyes softening with gratitude. "Thank you, Rich. I appreciate it more than you know." As Rich stepped outside, the cool air hit him like a wave, invigorating yet daunting. He hurried down the bustling streets, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. He had seen the struggles of homelessness up close and felt a deepening empathy for those trapped in its clutches. But as he approached the diner, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. The diner was abuzz with its usual morning crowd, but there was no sign of Sam. Rich scanned the faces of the patrons, a mix of hurried professionals and weary travelers, but none resembled the kind-hearted man who had become an unexpected friend. He walked up to the counter, where an elderly waitress, bustling with coffee pots, noticed his anxious demeanor. "Can I help you, hon?" she asked, her voice warm and inviting. "Have you seen Sam Jenkins?" Rich asked, trying to keep the worry from creeping into his voice. "He's a regular here." The waitress paused, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, Sam? He hasn't been around for a couple of days. Last I heard, he was in good spirits, but I don't know where he might be now." Rich's heart sank further. "Do you know if he mentioned where he was going?" She shook her head. "No, he didn't say. But if you see him, tell him we miss him around here." Rich nodded, his mind racing. He felt a mix of frustration and fear bubbling within him. What if Sam had fallen back into the abyss he was, trying so hard to escape? He decided to check the nearby park, a place where he often saw Sam sitting and talking with other homeless individuals. As he walked through the park, the colorful leaves crunched underfoot, the vibrant autumn scenery contrasting sharply with the anxiety building in his chest. He spotted a few familiar faces, but Sam was nowhere to be found. He approached a group of men sitting on a bench, their laughter echoing through the crisp air. "Excuse me," Rich said, his voice steady but urgent. "Have any of you seen Sam Jenkins?" One of the men, a tall figure with a grizzled beard, looked up. "Yeah, I saw him a couple of days ago. He seemed all right, but he was talking about heading to the old bridge." "The old bridge?" Rich echoed, his gut tightening. What was he doing there? "Don't know, man. Just said something about needing to clear his head. You know how it is." Rich nodded, his heart heavy. He thanked the men and hurried toward the bridge, each step filled with mounting anxiety. As he approached, the sound of rushing water filled his ears, mingling with the distant echoes of city life. The bridge was a stark contrast to the refined world Rich inhabited. Graffiti covered the concrete, and the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. He peered over the edge, half expecting to see Sam's familiar figure, but the area was eerily empty. "Sam!" Rich called out, his voice rising above the noise of the water. "Sam, are you here?" No response, just the relentless rush of the river below. Panic surged within him. He recalled the stories Sam had shared about his struggles, the dark times that had nearly consumed him. What if he had succumbed to that darkness again? Rich felt a deep sense of responsibility, the weight of his privilege pressing down upon him. He had the means to help, but what if he had failed? He turned away from the railing, his mind racing. He needed to find Sam, to understand what had driven him to disappear. As he walked back toward the park, he noticed a small group of people gathered near a cluster of trees, their murmurs low and concerned. Rich approached cautiously. "What's going on?" he asked, hoping for news. One woman turned to him, her expression grave. We're looking for a homeless man. They say he might have gotten into trouble. He was seen near the bridge." Rich's heart dropped. "What trouble?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They say he was acting erratically, talking to himself. Some people think he might have jumped," she replied, her eyes wide with concern. Rich felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "No, no, that's not Sam. He wouldn't do that," he insisted, his mind racing with images of their conversations, the hope he had seen in Sam's eyes. "He was doing better. He had plans." The woman placed a comforting hand on his arm. "We're just trying to find him. We don't know if he's okay." With renewed urgency, Rich joined the search party, calling Sam's name at every turn. He could feel the weight of despair growing heavier with each passing moment. The sun dipped lower, casting an orange hue over the city, and Rich's heart ached with the thought of losing the one person who had opened his eyes to the world beyond his own. Hours passed, and as darkness began to settle, Rich felt a sense of defeat wash over him. But he pushed it aside, refusing to give up hope. "We'll find him," he told the group, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Finally, as the stars began to twinkle above, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sam, disheveled but alive, his eyes wide and filled with a mix of confusion and relief. "Sam!" Rich exclaimed, rushing toward him. "Where have you been?" Sam looked at him, his expression a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. "I just needed to think, Rich. Things got overwhelming." Rich's heart raced as he pulled Sam into a fierce embrace. "You scared me. I thought I lost you." "I'm sorry," Sam murmured, his voice shaky. "I just had to get away for a bit. I've been through so much. Sometimes it feels like it's all crashing down again." Rich stepped back, searching Sam's eyes. "You don't have to go through this alone. I want to help you, but you need to let me in." Sam nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "I don't want to drag you down, Rich. You have so much going for you. I'm just me." "That's exactly why I want to help," Rich replied, his voice firm. "You're worth it, Sam. Let's get through this together." As they stood under the vast, starry sky, Rich felt a shift within himself. The journey ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to face it, side by side with Sam. Together, they would confront the harsh realities of the streets and the systemic issues that kept so many trapped in cycles of despair. In that moment, Rich understood that true wealth was measured not by what one had, but by the connections forged and the compassion shared. The morning sun cast long shadows over the bustling city as Rich Thompson navigated through the crowded streets, his mind racing with thoughts of his next business venture. Yet beneath his confident exterior lay a gnawing worry. His friendship with Sam Jenkins had irrevocably changed him. The lessons learned from their encounters weighed heavily on him, particularly as he recalled the stories of hardship Sam had shared. With each passing day, Rich found himself more deeply entangled in the challenges faced by those less fortunate. Rich's phone buzzed violently in his pocket, pulling him from his reverie. It was a message from an unknown number. "Sam's in trouble. He's been arrested." The words struck him like a physical blow, and he stopped in his tracks, heart racing. "Arrested," he muttered to himself, disbelief flooding his mind. Sam had been trying to turn his life around. How could this happen? Determined to uncover the truth, Rich rushed to the police station, his mind swirling with possibilities. The dimly lit lobby was filled with somber faces, each person lost in their own troubles. He approached the front desk, where a weary officer sat, looking as though he had seen better days. "I need to see Samuel Jenkins," Rich asserted, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. The officer looked up, his expression revealing nothing. "He's in holding. What's your relationship to him?" "I'm his friend," Rich replied, his tone sharp. "I'm here to help." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Didn't know he had any friends. You'll need to wait." Rich clenched his fists and paced the small waiting area. the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, he was ushered into a small, sterile room where Sam sat, looking disheveled and defeated. "Rich?" Sam's voice was barely above a whisper, but the recognition in his eyes sparked a flicker of hope. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you were arrested," Rich said, his voice firm. "I came to help. What happened?" Sam sighed, the weight of the world evident in his weary demeanor. "I didn't do anything, Rich. I was just trying to find some work. The officer, he didn't like me, said I was loitering, then accused me of stealing." Rich's blood boiled at the thought of Sam being wrongfully accused. "We'll get you out of this. I promise." But Sam shook his head, a hint of resignation in his expression. "I've been in this system before. They don't care about the truth. I'm just another homeless guy to them." "No," Rich exclaimed, the fire of determination igniting within him. "You're more than that. I won't let them do this to you." The next day, Rich found himself at the precinct, seeking out the officer who had arrested Sam. He was determined to confront the man whose actions had jeopardized his friend's future. After some searching, he found Officer Caldwell, a burly figure with an air of arrogance that made Rich's stomach churn. "Officer Caldwell," Rich said, keeping his voice low yet firm, "I need to talk to you about Sam Jenkins." Caldwell turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you?" "I'm Richard Thompson," Rich declared, his rich voice echoing in the small space. "And I'm here to discuss the charges against Sam. I believe he's been framed." The officer chuckled, a contemptuous sound that grated on Rich's nerves. "You think I care what you believe? He's a nobody." Rich stepped closer, his resolve hardening. "He may be a nobody to you, but he's a friend of mine, and I intend to expose what you've done." Caldwell's demeanor shifted slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Thompson." "Try me," Rich shot back, unflinching. "I have resources, and I won't stop until I uncover the truth." With that, Rich gathered evidence, speaking to witnesses and reviewing footage from nearby security cameras. He spent days chasing down leads, fueled by a passion he had never felt in the boardroom. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became that Caldwell had a pattern of targeting the homeless, using his badge to impose his will on those who were already vulnerable. Finally, Rich was ready to present his findings. He arranged a meeting with the police chief, a stern woman with a reputation for integrity. As he laid out the evidence, her expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "Are you telling me that Officer Caldwell has been abusing his power?" she asked, disbelief tinged with anger. Rich nodded, his heart racing. "Yes, and I have witnesses willing to testify. This isn't just about Sam. It's about a systemic issue that needs to be addressed." The chief leaned back in her chair, contemplating the implications. "If what you say is true, this could lead to serious repercussions for Caldwell and the department." Rich felt a surge of hope. It has to be done. People like Sam deserve protection, not persecution. Days later, the investigation was launched, leading to a public outcry against the misconduct within the police department. Caldwell was placed on administrative leave, and for the first time, Rich felt the weight of justice beginning to tip in favor of the underprivileged. The courtroom was packed when the day of the trial finally arrived. Rich sat next to Sam, who was dressed in clean clothes, though the shadow of his recent ordeal still clung to him. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of anticipation and fear hanging in the air. As the proceedings began, Rich squeezed Sam's shoulder reassuringly. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. Sam nodded, though his eyes betrayed his anxiety. The prosecutor presented the case, laying out the evidence of Caldwell's misconduct and the false accusations against Sam. Witness after witness came forward, voicing their experiences with the officer, painting a picture of a man who had misused his authority. When it was finally Sam's turn to testify, he stood tall, his voice steady despite the nerves. "I've been through a lot, but I've never stolen anything. "I just want a chance to start over," he declared, his honesty striking a chord with the jury. Rich watched as the jury leaned in, their expressions shifting from skepticism to understanding. He felt a swell of pride for Sam, who had faced adversity with unparalleled courage. Finally, the moment arrived. The jury returned with their verdict, not guilty. A wave of relief washed over Rich as he turned to Sam, who was visibly trembling, tears glistening in his eyes. "You did it, Sam!" Rich exclaimed, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You're free!" In that moment, the courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and disbelief. Rich knew this wasn't just a victory for Sam. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been marginalized or oppressed. As they exited the courthouse, Rich felt a profound sense of purpose awaken within him. He turned to Sam, a smile breaking across his face. "This is just the beginning. I want to help others like you." Sam's eyes lit up as he processed Rich's words. "You really mean that?" "Absolutely," Rich replied, determination etched on his features. "I'm launching a foundation in your name, Sam. We're going to create programs that help the homeless find jobs, secure housing, and regain their dignity." The two men stood there, surrounded by the bustling city that had once felt so isolating to Rich. Now, he saw it through a different lens, one filled with compassion and connection. As they walked side by side, Rich couldn't help but feel that he had finally discovered what true wealth meant. It wasn't measured in money or status. It was found in the lives touched, the hearts healed, and the bonds forged through shared experiences. Together, Rich and Sam would ensure that the struggles of the homeless would not be forgotten, transforming their pain into a powerful movement for change.